Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are pulling back the curtain on one of the most powerful yet least understood forces dictating your life in the modern financial world.
That's right. We are peering deep inside the mechanics of the system that decides if you get that loan, if you qualify for that apartment, or even what price you pay for car insurance.
We're talking about credit scores, massive data profiles, and the surprisingly vast yet fragile nature of the information we all entrust to the system.
We have been handed a substantial stack of sources detailing the entire life cycle of a corporate giant, one of the big three, a company whose reach stretches across continents and whose name is, synonymous with financial gatekeeping. Experian and Flanker.
Experian. You definitely know the name. You've probably used their website. But what I think many of us miss is that this company operates on a fundamentally dual mandate.
It really does. On one hand, they're like a required utility, a library of stable financial data.
But on the other hand, they function as an aggressive global data factory, constantly expanding its reach and monetization strategies, all while grappling with an astonishing string of major high-profile security vulnerabilities.
And that dual mandate is the core tension we really need to explore. Our mission today is to unpack this complex structure. We need to understand Experian's foundational role as a credit gatekeeper, a role often enforced by law, and then contrast that with their incredibly lucrative, often opaque secondary role as a massively scaled data broker.
And maybe most critically, we have to analyze the devastating global implications of their security record. I mean, it stretches across multiple continents and affects hundreds of millions of people worldwide.
It's a huge undertaking. So just the basics to start. Experian Inc. is an Irish multinational data broker and consumer credit reporting company.
And this is not some small Silicon Valley startup. This is a massive corporation, a constituent of the FTSE 100 index listed on the London Stock Exchange.
Absolutely. In the U.S., they stand shoulder to shoulder with TransUnion and Equifax, a triumvirate that, holds the keys to creditworthiness for nearly every adult in the country.
Deciding your access to capital, homes, and sometimes even employment opportunities.
And when you look at the financials, that tension becomes almost unavoidable. We're discussing a company that is absolutely foundational to global commerce, yet their track record implies a deep operational vulnerability.
What are we talking about in terms of revenue?
They reported revenues of U.S. $7.097 billion in fiscal year 2024.
Wow. So think about that. $7 billion plus company that manages the most critical, sensitive financial identifiers imaginable.
Yet they consistently face repeated, dramatic security failures and regulatory fines. It just suggests a fundamental systemic misalignment between their mandate to protect data and their apparent ability to do so on a global scale.
And that is the puzzle we are tasked with solving for you today.
Let's get into it.
Okay, let's unpack this history, because the Experian we know today isn't some organic entity that grew from scratch. It's a fascinating timeline of rapid corporate acquisition, sale, and evolution.
It really shows how a U.S.-based financial reporting service metastasized into this global data giant.
So where does it start?
It's a classic example of corporate consolidation. The company's lineage first traces back over 5 decades to 1968, when a business called Credit Data Corporation was acquired by TRW Inc.
TRW, I know that name. They were a huge defense and tech contractor, right?
Exactly. So Credit Data Corporation was renamed TRW Information Services. For decades, it was just a specialized financial reporting arm tucked inside this much larger, established conglomerate.
Yeah.
It was stable, if, somewhat anonymous.
But that stability gave way to some really rapid churn in the mid-90s. I mean, the defining moment for Experian's global identity happened in 1996, didn't it?
It did. It was a rapid two-step sale that just demonstrates how quickly these large-scale data assets were recognized as indispensable.
Okay, so step one.
The first step was in November 1996, when TRW sold the unit, which was then operating under the Experian name, to 2 major private equity firms, Bain Capital and Thomas H. Lee Partners.
Right, and private equity is known for buying things to streamline and, sell them quickly for a profit.
And they absolutely did. The really interesting part is just the sheer speed of the second sale.
It was just 1 month later, right?
Just 1 month. In December 1996, those 2 firms sold Experian again. This time, the buyer was the Great Universal Stores Limited, or GUS.
Okay, GUS. For our listeners, what was GUS?
You can think of it as a massive UK retail conglomerate. sort of like a Sears or a Tesco that relied very heavily on customers using credit for their purchases.
That makes perfect sense. So they bought a credit reporting agency to support their core retail business.
That rapid turnaround shows the immediate valuation jump, but the real strategic move happened next. GUS wasn't just acquiring the American arm. They were merging the U.S. operation with their own internal behemoth.
Oh, interesting. So they already had their own credit business in the UK.
They did. GUS already owned CCN, which was the largest credit service company in the UK at the time. GUS merged CCN directly into the newly acquired Experian entity.
So that single moment is the birth of the multinational structure we're analyzing today.
Absolutely. By fusing the large-scale, comprehensive U.S. credit reporting infrastructure with the leading UK market services, they instantly dominated both sides of the Atlantic. It gave them an unprecedented transatlantic mandate over consumer financial health.
It really secured their status as a global player from that moment onward.
It did, and this corporate structure eventually sought its own independence. A decade later, in October 2006, Experian emerged from GUS and officially listed on the London Stock Exchange.
Firmly establishing its independent public identity as a massive FTSE 100 constituent.
Exactly.
So if we look at the entity today, that legacy of rapid global expansion really dictates its footprint. You mentioned the revenue, but let's talk about their sheer physical scale.
Oh, Experian is formally headquartered in Dublin, Ireland.
Which is a pretty strategic move, I'd imagine. Puts them in an advantageous position within the EU regulatory and tax environment.
No doubt. But their physical operations are truly global, reflecting that initial GUS-CCN merger. They maintain massive operational centers in Costa Mesa, California, Nottingham in the UK, São Paulo, Brazil.
And we'll definitely be talking more about Brazil shortly.
We will. And also Hamburg, Germany, Singapore, and Hyderabad, India. It's a huge footprint.
And managing this scale requires an army, I'm sure. The sources indicate they have, what, 21,700 employees as of 2025?
That's the number. And when you look at the financials again, that operating income of US $1.928 billion for FY 2024, sitting on total assets of US $11.712 billion. Well, that's the financial bedrock supporting this whole global operation.
It's an undeniable infrastructure, and I think to really understand their function, you have to look past the consumer-facing score, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. While credit reporting is their primary required function, the source material really highlights their secondary and, arguably more profitable role selling decision analytic and marketing assistance to businesses.
Okay, so this is where they shift from being a credit score calculator to a full-blown data broker. What does that decision analytic and marketing assistance actually look like in practice for, say, an average business?
It means they're selling deeply synthesized consumer profiles. It's what the sources term individual fingerprinting and targeting.
Individual fingerprinting, that sounds intense.
It is. This goes far beyond just determining if you're a high or low credit risk. This is about synthesizing your demographic information, your geographical location, your likely socioeconomic status, and your spending patterns into a predictive model.
And they sell this capability to companies.
Yes, so those companies can decide who to target with a specific advertisement, a specific price point, or a specific product line. They are fundamentally shaping how businesses interact with you, the consumer, turning data aggregation into a sophisticated weapon for market segmentation.
And to drive home just how deeply embedded they are in U.S. infrastructure, we need to spend a moment on the USPS partnership, which I think is often overlooked.
It is, and it perfectly illustrates their function as an essential utility. The USPS, United States Postal Service, needs clean, verified data to ensure mail gets delivered efficiently, right? Especially to new addresses or when data is transferred between state systems.
So Experian provides the validation engine for this.
That's it. Their data confirms that a specific address corresponds to a known, verified consumer profile.
So when a government or a large commercial entity needs to ensure they have the absolute most current address for millions of people, they often rely on Experian's data and systems to check the boxes.
Precisely. This means Experian's data is literally woven into the critical national infrastructure of the United States mail system. It's an integration that proves their essential nature. I mean, they are not easily replaced.
But that level of integration also means the stakes for security and regulatory compliance are catastrophically high.
Because failure impacts not just personal credit, but vital government and commerce functions.
Okay, so given that they are this globally integrated, powerful, and critical utility, how do they navigate the legal requirements placed upon them, especially those intended to protect the consumer?
Well, that brings us to a major tension point. the controversy surrounding free credit reports.
Right. This is a classic case of, well, corporate maneuvering around the spirit of the law, isn't it?
It really is. In the U.S., the right to a free annual credit report is enshrined in the Fair and Accurate Credit Transactions Act of 2003, the FAST Act. The legislative intent was crystal clear. Consumers should have mandatory free transparency into the data that determines their financial future.
But instead of simply directing consumers to the legally mandated annual disclosure site, Experian went in a very different direction.
They did. They heavily marketed their for-profit service, freecreditreport.com.
And this is the core criticism highlighted in the sources. Experian, along with the other two bureaus, was consistently criticized and sued for selling reports to consumers who, by law, could get that exact report for free.
They were capitalizing on consumer confusion and leveraging their brand recognition to drive paid enrollments. It was a huge business.
And this is where the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, stepped in back in 2005. The settlement Experian accepted wasn't just about general misleading ads. It was highly specific and pretty damning.
It was. The FTC charged that Experian had violated a prior settlement by failing to adequately disclose a crucial detail.
Which was?
That customers responding to the free credit report advertisement would be automatically enrolled in Experian's expensive recurring credit monitoring program.
For how much?
It was $79.95.
Wow. That is a textbook definition of a bait and switch. They use the word free to lure people in, knowing that the public generally trusts the need for credit monitoring, and then they secretly auto-enrolled them in a recurring charge.
That's exactly it. They were undercutting the FaxiTax guarantee of free transparency with a high-cost subscription service.
It demonstrates a willingness to, aggressively monetize every single touch point, even those designed by Congress to be consumer protections.
And these regulatory penalties aren't just limited to historical U.S. marketing practices. We see major financial enforcement actions that hit at the core quality of their service, both domestically and internationally.
Let's look at the 2017 action from the U.S. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. For our listeners who might not be familiar, what exactly is the CFPB and why did they get involved here?
The CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, is the watchdog established after the 2008 financial crisis. It's designed specifically to regulate financial products and services offered to consumers, including credit reporting.
And they fined Experian.
In 2017, the CFPB fined Experian $3 million. The significance here is that the fine wasn't related to a marketing deception or a breach. It was for providing invalid credit scores to consumers.
Invalid scores, so the core product was just wrong. That suggests a fundamental operational failure in the very thing they're selling. What makes a score invalid?
The sources suggest there were systematic issues in how the data was aggregated and processed. This resulted in scores that just did not accurately reflect the underlying financial data.
So if the gatekeeper is providing faulty information, it creates chaos.
Complete chaos. Consumers are denied loans they should qualify for, or they are forced into higher interest rates. The CFPB fine implies a systemic failure to maintain data integrity, which really destabilizes the entire lending ecosystem that depends on these scores being accurate.
And internationally, their practices are being policed even more stringently, especially in Europe, where data privacy is, paramount.
Absolutely. The recent event detailed in the sources regarding the Netherlands is a profound demonstration of their vulnerability to EU regulation.
What happened there?
It's a big one. In October 2025, Experian shut down its entire Dutch operations, just packed up and left.
The whole operation. Why?
This withdrawal followed a massive 2.7 million fine levied by the Dutch Data Protection Authority. The reason cited was illegally processing credit reference data on Dutch consumers.
When a major European regulator issues a fine that forces a complete market withdrawal that speaks volumes about the severity of the offense, what kind of illegal processing were they engaged in?
Well, the details suggest that they were processing and potentially sharing consumer data without sufficient legal basis or consent. It likely violated core GDPR general data protection regulation principles.
So they were treating consumer data in a way the Dutch regulator found fundamentally unacceptable.
And it shows that Experian's large scale doesn't grant them immunity. In fact, their size makes them a larger target for regulators seeking to enforce these strict data protection laws.
This cycle of fines and market withdrawal is linked directly back to that secondary role we identified, the data brokering.
It is. And this is where the aha moment for many listeners will land. We need to talk about Mosaic.
Mosaic, what is it?
Mosaic is Experian's proprietary market segmentation tool, and it beautifully illustrates the extent to which your consumer profile is monetized and repurposed far beyond basic credit decisions.
So it's not about loans anymore.
Not at all. It takes demographic, geographic, and behavioral data and synthesizes it into hyper-granular consumer identities for sale to businesses, marketers, and critically political parties.
The granularity here is just stunning, isn't it? It's not just a demographic bucket, it's an individual fingerprint.
Exactly. In the British version, the sources detail that Mosaic breaks down consumers into 15 main groups, which are then further subdivided into 89 hyper-specific categories.
89. And these are precise, descriptive labels designed to capture every facet of a person's existence.
That's the idea. We aren't talking about broad labels like suburban homeowners or city dwellers.
So give us a few examples of these highly specific labels from the source material. What do they call people?
Well, we're talking about classifications like corporate chieftains. The assumption being high net worth, busy executives who might respond to specific luxury branding,
Okay.
or golden empty nesters. A demographic characterized by having adult children who have left home, high disposable income, and specific lifestyle interests. These labels are designed to predict your spending habits, your hobbies, even your media consumption.
And the power of this tool is that this level of segmentation can be taken down to the level of individual postcodes, right?
To the postcode. Imagine, the moment you move into a specific neighborhood, you're instantly categorized as a rising metro star or a thrifty pensioner.
It allows for surgical precision in marketing. If
Yeah.
you're a retailer, you know exactly which catalog to send to which house.
And if you're a political operative, you know precisely what language will resonate with the likely voters in that small geographic area.
And the source material confirms this political usage, which is arguably the most sensitive application of this tool. Mosaic was first adopted by the Labour Party and then subsequently taken up by the Conservatives in the 2015 UK general election campaign.
This is so significant. It highlights that Experian isn't just selling to banks deciding on a mortgage rate. They're selling deep, actionable insight into the electorate itself,
They are providing the underlying infrastructure that enables modern political micro-targeting.
which means the data used to calculate your credit limit is also being leveraged to fine-tune the political messaging you encounter, perhaps exploiting a perceived vulnerability or interest associated with your assigned behavioral label.
And we can see this aggressive expansion continuing through their acquisition strategy. They are proactively buying up new forms of data.
Absolutely. The 2017 acquisition of Clarity Services is a perfect example. Clarity Services is a credit bureau specializing in alternative consumer data.
What does that mean, alternative data?
It means data sources outside of traditional loans. So think payday loans, rent payments, utility bills. By integrating this alternative data, Experian broadens the scope of the consumer profile they can sell. It ensures they capture information on consumers who might not have traditional credit histories.
And on the international stage, we see them moving heavily into risk mitigation, which is, I guess, a bit ironic given their own history of breaches.
It's a very key observation. In 2024, they agreed to acquire the Brazilian digital fraud prevention provider ClearSale for $350 million.
So they are strategically embedding themselves into high-growth, high-risk data areas internationally, constantly increasing the volume and sensitivity of the data they handle.
While simultaneously trying to sell solutions to manage the fraud risk that their own expanded data universe creates.
Which brings us inevitably to the catastrophic downside of holding so much sensitive, high-value data. The continuous, large-scale, and globally publicized security breaches that have plagued the company.
This next section, I think, must be approached with the gravity it deserves. The security record of Experian is not merely vulnerable. It reads like a document detailing repeated, escalating global catastrophes.
So where do we start?
We have to begin with the 2013 identity theft scandal involving the Vietnamese national Huy Ngo.
This case really shone an unwelcome spotlight on the data aggregator side of Experian's business. Ngo was a prolific identity thief, charged by the U.S. Department of Justice with attempting to sell personally identifiable information, or PII, on hundreds of thousands of U.S. residents.
And this PII, the DOJ initially alleged, was acquired from an Experian subsidiary and data aggregator called Court Ventures.
So the initial narrative was straightforward. An Experian subsidiary, having aggregated sensitive data, sold access to that data stream to a known identity thief who then resold it for profit on the digital black market.
Right. It was a failure of due diligence and oversight at a bare minimum.
But the sources contain a fascinating and complicated twist regarding the chain of custody.
They do. Ingo later testified under oath that the information he sold to identity thieves was actually acquired from another hacker based in Russia and not from Experian or Court Ventures directly.
That discrepancy doesn't exactly absolve Experian, does it?
Not at all, but it complicates the supply chain of stolen data. Whether the ultimate source was a direct sale by the subsidiary or a Russian hacker exploiting a vulnerability, the system Indio was running these identity fraud-enabling websites, superget.info and findget.me, was clearly successful in leveraging massive amounts of sensitive U.S. data.
And the specific types of PII being sold on these sites is what should truly shock the listener. This wasn't just old email lists being passed around.
No, not at all. The data offered for anonymous sale included the full package required for complete financial impersonation. Name, address, social security number.
The SSN, of course.
Date of birth, place of work, driver's license number, mother's maiden name, a classic security question. Answer: bank account numbers, bank routing numbers, email accounts, and other account passwords.
Wait. Other account passwords. That implies that the aggregated data stream was not only containing financial identifiers, but was potentially storing or linking login credentials for other systems.
It sure does.
That moves way beyond credit reporting and into a direct threat to a person's entire digital life.
It absolutely does. It demonstrates that the information Experian manages, whether directly or through its subsidiaries, is the fundamental, immutable data required to completely hijack a person's identity. When data this sensitive is breached, the fallout for the consumer is permanent and requires years of vigilance to mitigate.
Now let's move to the massive global breaches that have made headlines. Starting in 2015, we saw the North American breach affecting customers of T-Mobile.
This breach exposed a deep, sustained vulnerability. The window of exposure was noted as September 2013 to September 2015.
A 2-year period.
A 2-year period where the breach was active before it was discovered and contained. Up to 15 million people were affected. And these included customers of T-Mobile who had applied for Experian credit checks, meaning the data was fresh and directly linked to recent financial activity.
The CEO of Experian North America, Craig Boundy, was personally obligated to send out letters confirming the compromise. That kind of public, direct admission signals the severity.
It does. And then the geographic scope expanded rapidly. In 2020, Experian suffered a substantial data breach in South Africa.
The numbers are staggering again. Data on 24 million South Africans was leaked, alongside detailed information on nearly 800,000 businesses.
And out of those businesses, over 24,000 had their financial details exposed. But the real controversy here stems less from the size of the breach and more from the corporate response.
How so?
Precisely. The sources highlight that Experian initially issued statements claiming the incident had been contained and the exposure was limited.
Which turned out to be false.
It was later shown to be untrue. The data eventually found its way onto the internet and into the hands of malicious actors. This pattern of delayed or inaccurate reporting just severely erodes consumer trust and raises serious questions about their commitment to transparency during a crisis.
So if the 2020 breach in South Africa was significant, the 2021 breach in Brazil, related to their subsidiary Serasa Experian, is described in the source material with some truly concerning language. I think it was probably the most severe data breach in history.
That phrasing is used for a reason. Just look at the scope. The breach resulted in data on 220 million citizens being sold on the web.
220 million. To put that in perspective, Brazil's population is around 214 million.
So this data set covered nearly every single citizen, including some who were already deceased. It was a total countrywide compromise.
What specific PII was leaked in this catastrophic event that elevated it above a typical breach?
The leak included the usuals: names, social security numbers, addresses, but it also included income tax declaration forms and other deeply private financial information.
Income tax forms.
The inclusion of income tax declaration forms is the key differentiator here. This isn't just basic identity data. This is the full financial fingerprint proof of income, assets, dependents, detailed financial standing.
For identity thieves, this is the ultimate prize. It lets them create completely authentic, high-value fraudulent profiles.
It's everything. And what was the Experian's official defense regarding the source of this virtually complete data set on the entire Brazilian population?
I'm almost afraid to ask.
The defense was highly specific, almost semantic. Experian claimed there was no evidence that its systems had been compromised. They essentially argued the data must have been aggregated or obtained elsewhere.
But the sources note that a Brazilian consumer rights foundation critically countered this claim.
They did. Their argument was, how could such a comprehensive nationwide data set, including tax forms, have been compiled and leaked unless Experian or its subsidiary Serasa was the only probable source?
So even if an outsider performed the extraction, the data was uniquely consolidated within Experian's domain.
That's the implication. The criticism suggested that the company was engaging in semantic evasion rather than acknowledging a fundamental security failure in the way they managed or protected this repository.
This ongoing cycle of massive global compromise raises an essential question. Are these dramatic, large-scale breaches the only way consumer data is exposed? Or is the day-to-day security posture equally vulnerable?
Unfortunately, the latter is true. The sources detail a much more subtle, almost shockingly simple security flaw that emerged in late 2022 and was only fixed in early 2023.
So this illustrates continuous vulnerability, even in their most basic consumer-facing operations.
It really does.
Let's break down this technical vulnerability because it sounds like something that should never have existed in a system managing this level of sensitive data.
It was a basic flaw in Experian's website that allowed access to an individual's full credit report without requiring full authentication. Imagine a highly secured vault where the front door requires 3 keys and a biometric scan.
But the window on the second floor has a broken latch.
Exactly. The vulnerability was rooted in a common, yet often overlooked, parameter manipulation technique on the web address, the URL.
So how did an attacker exploit this?
When a user requested their credit report, the URL contained certain parameters, usually something generic like accrue, the OW standing for out of wallet or security questions. An attacker found that simply by changing the last part of the URL being requested, just switching it from that secure URL path to the unsecured ACReport path, the system was tricked.
So just by modifying the web address to bypass the step that required them to answer security questions, like their mother's maiden name or past addresses, they could immediately pull the full sensitive report.
That is the implication. The system incorrectly validated the request and just delivered the report without completing the necessary mandatory authentication steps.
Unbelievable.
The flaw was fixed in early 2023, but the truly unnerving detail is that the scope of the damage remains unknown. There is no reliable number for how many credit reports were stolen through this simple technical weakness during its active period.
The fact that such a basic, almost amateur technical flaw could exist, allowing unauthorized access to credit reports for an unknown period, it sits right next to the globally publicized catastrophes in South Africa and the compromise of nearly every Brazilian citizen. It paints a picture of a consistent, multi-layered security failure across different platforms and different levels of technical sophistication.
So we circle back to the core question. What does this detailed journey mean for you, the listener, who is required to participate in this financial system? We've mapped the history of a company that is absolutely a foundational pillar of global finance.
And one that's required by U.S. law to offer free transparency.
Right. Yet simultaneously, they are monetizing your identity and your life patterns to an extreme degree, using hyper-granular tools like Mosaic to categorize you as a corporate chieftain or a golden empty nester.
They profit immensely by knowing precisely who you are and what you might buy or vote for.
And the unavoidable third dimension of this analysis is their security record. They have repeatedly failed, sometimes spectacularly, and sometimes through shockingly simple technical oversights, to secure that critical data against massive, high-profile breaches.
From the 2-year T-Mobile vulnerability in the U.S. to the staggering compromise of nearly the entire population in Brazil, their defenses have just proven insufficient time and time again.
And the sources prove the stakes are not trivial. We are talking about the compromise of the most sensitive details defining your economic life and identity, income tax declaration forms, SSNs, mother's maiden names, and even other account passwords.
This duality, this constant existential conflict between generating massive profit through data aggregation and the fundamental repeated failure in data stewardship, that's the central, critical takeaway. Experian is both financially essential and profoundly risky.
Which leaves us with a final question. the one we want you to mull over or explore on your own. It builds directly on the source material we've unpacked. Given that these massive credit reporting agencies perform a critical, almost governmental function in regulating global finance.
But also pose an unprecedented, repeated, and documented risk to the identity and financial security of nearly every adult citizen on the planet.
How should regulators balance the essential function these companies perform against the unprecedented, documented risk they pose to public financial safety?
It is a fundamental conflict between necessary structure and catastrophic liability. The very systems we rely on may be the very systems putting us at the greatest risk.
Food for thought indeed.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the complex, powerful, and precarious world of Experian. We'll see you next time.
Goodbye for now.